Hello and welcome to the Dark Money Files, in which we usually try to shine a light into a murky world, and there have rarely been worlds quite as murky as the one we find ourselves in now. I'm Ray Blake, with me is Graham Barrow. You'll notice a slightly different introduction today, but then we've got quite a different podcast episode for you as well, haven't we, Graham?
Well, we have, Ray, and hello everybody, and this is really quite exciting to be doing something not just a bit different, but very definitely unscripted. So there's probably some jeopardy there, but what the hell? Let's go for it, Ray.
Yeah, why not?
Should we explain what we're going to do then?
Yes, what we're going to do is look back on 2020 as a whole, pick out some of the news stories that resonated with us and just have a chat about them, really, see where we go. It's all a bit experimental. It might work, might not. Hashtag no safety net.
Yeah. And of course, the interesting thing here is that given that we've had one pretty big story all year, some of these may not quite have got the attention that they should have done at the time. So it'd be nice to have a chat about something different from just coronavirus, although I'm sure it'll creep in.
Well, I agree. Where should we start, Graham?
Well, I'm going to be really, really experimental here, Ray. I suggest January.
January 2020. Oh, what a different world that was, though, Graham.
It's almost impossible to remember what it was like pre-lockdown, isn't it, really?
That's true. Yeah. So what were some of the big stories?
Well, I recall, Ray, that there was massive bushfires in Australia back in January. Remember that?
Yeah, definitely.
So, I mean, that's obviously climate is becoming a big deal again because Joe Biden has made it a central plank of his new administration. But this whole weather-climate thing, I think, is always an interesting conversation. And so many people do struggle between weather and climate. So let's have a chat about that.
Yeah, no, I mean, that is useful. And it does relate to what we do as well, which is that, you need to measure trends, not by outlying values.
That's a good point, Ray.
Thanks for that, mate. But actually, we look at, that was the hottest day ever, that was the coldest day ever, whatever. But that's not really important because one day is always going to be the hottest or the coldest. It's the trend that's important. I mean, that said, the trend data, absolutely supports what we all believe anecdotally anyway, I think.
Yeah, but it does point us in the direction of just because we have a cold few days doesn't mean to say that global warming's rubbish, does it?
No, absolutely. That is the genuine confusion between weather and climate. But I mean, fires are a force of nature, aren't they? I mean, there's some suggestion that at least part of this was man-made or man-fueled. Yeah. But actually, there have been recent scientific advances that show, for instance, that bushfires are necessary for the promulgation of a number of tree species.
Oh, absolutely. And it's really interesting to watch the regrowth of a forest after a fire like that because all sorts of hitherto redundant species suddenly reoccur.
So, to an extent, I mean, it's inconvenient. It's an anthropocentric inconvenience, if I can coin a phrase.
Easy for you to say.
Well, it wasn't actually. I needed a bit of a run-up, Graham. But actually, it's necessary for biodiversity.
Well, absolutely. And in fact, it's not even a modern phenomenon, is it? Because if you go back to the 1660s, it's pretty clear now that the Great Fire of London played a really important role in helping to stop the spread of the, was it the Black Death, bubonic plague? What one was it? It was. Is that the same thing? Doesn't matter. But it acted also as a fire break, using it literally in arresting the spread of the plague, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Not that I'm suggesting we deploy such tactics now. Heaven forfend.
No, that wouldn't be a great response to the coronavirus situation. We need to start lots of fires. It's not going to run.
I'm very surprised there's a certain figure over in the US who hasn't suggested that yet.
Do you know, Billy Joel just came straight to my head, and I suspect, was that where you were going?
No, it wasn't. I was just thinking I wouldn't put that past a certain president.
Oh, I see. No, I was thinking more musically, like we didn't start the fire.
No.
Yes, no, I can see where you're going with that now, Ray. Yeah, we're probably going to move on from that.
That's a good plan, I think. So, also in January, Prince Harry stepped down, didn't he, from public engagements?
Well, he did, and I find this is a tricky one because, as you know, I'm not a great royalist at all.
No.
But it's pretty tough. I'm not in favour of the institution of the royal family, but I feel quite sorry for those born into it because it's a bit like weather and climate. We need to distinguish here between people who get no choice in the matter, you're a member of the royal family, and the institution. So I had great sympathy with him and with Meghan, who pretty much can't find a decent press out there without making some comment or the other.
No, well, I agree with that entirely. But I mean, it's an interesting position for the royal family to be in, isn't it? You know, we do talk about the necessity of having an heir and a spare, and it seems the position of spare is suddenly vacant. So, I mean, just imagine that this were like a normal job, and you were seeking to recruit a replacement. What would that process look like?
I would think a lot of sex would be involved.
No, I don't mean the biological process.
Sorry, no.
I don't mean the biological process, Graham. I think we're all familiar with the with the key operations there. No, I'm talking about more about if the royal family decided, well, you know, this chap stood down. We need to find a replacement ready to get going.
Yeah, well, I think there's a soon-to-be retired president over in the US who might want to put himself up for that job.
Well, certainly his children would be in the right age range, wouldn't they? Some of them.
And up for it, I think, would be.
I suspect so. I suspect so. I wonder what the background checks would come back like.
Yeah, that could be a problem. And I'm just thinking about. I'm old enough to remember Prince Charles being inaugurated. Is the wrong word, isn't it? Carnarvon. What was he? Remind me.
Investiture.
Investiture.
He was invested. Yes,
he was, and it was back in was it the early 70s or late 60s? And he can't possibly
69, I think. I may be wrong.
Well, it sounds about right. He can't have imagined that here we are, 51 years later, and he's still Prince Charles.
Well, no, absolutely.
Not wishing the Queen to die, obviously, but it can't have been in his thinking.
No, that bridesmaid's frock certainly isn't as pearly white as it used to be, is it?
No. Well, there you go. Anything else happened in January that we should think about?
Well, there was. I don't know if you're aware of this story, Graham, but over in China, in a little known place called Wuhan, there was the emergence of a new viral disease.
Well, I've heard rumours, Ray.
Yeah, absolutely. And they called it COVID-19 because although it was only becoming prevalent in early 2020, it was actually identified as a new strain of coronavirus in 2019. So as the first instance in 2019, it was called COVID-19.
Do you know that makes sense?
It does make sense, yes. But I mean, you know, to be fair, so does the interpretation that it might have been the 19th iteration of a particular disease. Certainly, that was a popular theory in some circles.
Yeah, is that the same circles that insisted that the madness of George III be changed to the madness of King George, just in case people thought they'd missed the madness of George I and the madness of George II?
Yes, the American circles, Graham. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, a politician, I can't remember who it was now, but she did make herself look rather silly by insisting that, well, if we got through the first 18, I'm sure we'll get through this one fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So January, that was January.
Yes.
Now February then.
What happened in February?
Mr. Trump was impeached formally, wasn't he?
Well, that seems a lifetime ago as well. But yes, he was, and that is actually a pretty rare phenomenon. So it is worthy of note.
Very much so. Whether it was whether it was a successful impeachment or not, and depending on your definition of success, I suppose it was a momentous occurrence. But it was an odd one because here we have Congress acting in the capacity of a court to decide on matters of law. The matters of law seem way past dispute if you read the Mueller report. There's no question. And yet the decision seemed to be not driven by law.
I think that's a really good example of why we should separate the judiciary from the legislature, right?
Yeah.
Because to be fair, we may talk about the Supreme Court at some point, but it, even the Supreme Court, which is now alleged to be stuffed full of Trump appointees, appears to be trying to interpret the law reasonably neutrally.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not sure we could say that for the House.
No, quite so. And this denigration of fact, or the devaluing of actuality, as it were, isn't new. I mean, facts are no longer as determinative as we'd probably all like them to be. That's not new, but it is new in the legal realm, isn't it?
Well, it is, and it makes you wonder whether that quote from a former press secretary, for we have alternative facts, has actually invaded the consciousness of the House, and they think, I'm going to interpret this with my alternative facts. It's an interesting. So. I'd love to try and put a PhD thesis together using alternative facts. That might be tricky.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's one of those. Bottle opening events. You're not going to get the genie back in that particular bottle now that facts are up for grabs.
No, exactly.
Okay.
Can we move on to something a bit more light-hearted, but certainly a little less political? What do you reckon?
Well, we had the Oscars, didn't we, in February?
Well, we did, and you're more of a film buff than I am, so I'm probably going to hand over to you at this point and say, remind me, Ray, what one? Because I can't remember.
Well, it was Parasite. The Korean film, and I remember very clearly sitting in the cinema with a couple of my kids being absolutely enthralled by Parasite, and everybody in my provincial multi-screen cinema reacting in the same way. I've never ever seen that for a subtitled foreign film. It was an extraordinary experience, and I'm so glad that it won.
And I have to confess, I haven't seen Parasite yet, partly because I'm not a great film watcher, and partly because my wife, as you know, is very severely dyslexic, so that presents something of a challenge. Certainly I can't sit in the cinema reading out the subtitles to her. That doesn't tend to go down very well. So, and of course, we've been a bit distracted since, so I've never got round to watching it. But just the very fact of a subtitled Korean film winning the Oscars in any other year, of course, would have ended up being probably a bigger story than it was even so.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of two cultural pieces accompanied by subtitles that kind of have infused my year somewhat. The other one was a series on Netflix called Dark, which is very much up your alley. German made. And if your Netflix is set to default, you'll have received the dreadful American dubbed version. But if you change your settings, you can hear it in German and have some pretty decent subtitles on it. Extraordinary series.
All right.
But anyway.
As you know, I'm not a great watcher of stuff on the screen, so it's probably going to pass me by. But always interested. I've watched a couple of bits this year, but
yeah.
Okie
dokie. So I mean, the Oscars won't be the same in 2021 because apart from anything else, there's virtually no cinematic output for them to evaluate. I mean, it might be a really good time to release a film. Actually, you've got a fairly good chance of at least getting nominated if you produce any kind of output at the moment. There won't be an awful lot of competition after all.
No.
I mean, you could remake a government information film, I suspect, and get on the short list.
Well, some of them were very good. Do you remember? Is this just me? Am I just showing my age here? That thing when you'd walk into a lesson at school occasionally, and there'd be a projector set up, and you just think, "Oh, great, we're going to watch a film rather than have a lesson." And sometimes they were government information films, but you didn't mind because it was actually quite exciting seeing.
Yeah, watching something on a screen in a classroom. I mean, imagine that screens playing a role in education, Graham.
The young people won't understand that concept at all.
I mean, I find it difficult to imagine being back in a cinema now, although it was, one of the things that I did quite a lot of until a year ago.
Yeah, as I said, I'm not a great film watcher, but one of the things that I used to really love doing a few times a year was just nipping up to Waterloo, which for me is the end of the line on my local branch line, and watching a film on the IMAX there, which is a truly astonishing experience. I watched Avatar on the IMAX at Waterloo, and it's a huge screen, and it is quite all-embracing. It is quite an experience.
Oh, I think I can out-venue you there for Avatar. I watched it on a beach in Bermuda as the sun went down.
Okay, right, okay. Should never have brought that one up. I saw it in full 3D. Did you see it in 3D as well, Ray?
No, but I did have flaming torches all about us.
I reckon it was the Tiki version, wasn't it?
Exactly.
Excellent. Now, in a way, there's another story that links to the Oscars that emerged in February, isn't there?
Yes, there was. Harvey Weinstein, right?
Yes, or Stein, or whatever. Frankly, I'm not that bothered because it's not a name I like saying very much. And it turns out he wasn't a particularly pleasant person, does it?
No, I think we can say that without fear of contradiction or legal jeopardy.
Well, no, I think last time I looked, more than 80 people had come forward with complaints against him. So there's a point at which just the weight of anecdotal evidence does become slightly overwhelming.
Yeah.
But on the positive side, Ray, it does seem to have started a movement which genuinely is starting to change perception of how women and other minorities are dealt with, not just in the media, but generally.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
And in fact, led us to doing one of my favourite episodes of the podcast, where we talk about sexism in the way that our world is reported, and there is sexism.
Yeah, I'm so glad we did that. That was a great episode.
I'm proud of that episode. Yeah, absolutely. And more than one person has said since how much they appreciated us taking that stance and pointing out some of the inconsistencies in how we report between men and women when it comes to corruption. So yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, the other side to this, I suppose, is the illness as defence thing, isn't it?
Oh, God, yeah. Isn't it extraordinary how many famous people, going back to Ernest Saunders and beyond, suddenly become very ill when they find themselves being held to account?
And I think that doesn't make as much of an impression on me as it would have been had they been ill at the time of committing the offence.
Yeah. It is.
It's a little bit, my dog ate my homework.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure in what universe that could be deemed to be mitigation.
It is. I mean, we talk about sound bites, but I kind of this idea occurred to me that they are video bites, aren't they? They're a way of representing somebody visually as victim rather than as perpetrator. Seeing somebody limping in or being wheelchaired into court is a way of creating a sound or a video image that is designed to change public perception, I guess.
But who watched that scene of Harvey struggling along with a Zimmer frame and thought, oh, bless him?
Well, they probably are. I mean, I'm, call me a cynic, and I'm sure you would, but I sincerely believe that part of his advice is look as frail and as ill as you can because it might help in the verdict. And it's done. I mean, Manafort did the same thing, didn't he? Suddenly needed all sorts of assistance, and frankly, you can go back over decades of celebrity trials, and it would be a consistent feature across a very large number of them, which is depressing.
I mean, he seems okay now, Manafort.
Well, he does, but obviously, with President Trump, I see today or yesterday handed out another raft of pardons, including a couple more from the Mueller inquiry. So
Yes, indeed. His supporters prominent among all of them.
Yes.
People who funded him, corporate friends.
Yeah, people who lied on his behalf and admitted it.
Yeah, it is rather turning into a bit of a medieval cult, isn't it, really?
Well, yeah, but given their propensity for gerrymandering boundaries, it's not entirely atypical for certain sections of the political process in America, is it?
No,
or indeed elsewhere.
Or indeed elsewhere,
yeah. Anyone in a position of power are often known to usurp that power or use it for their own benefit.
I believe the Borgias probably got there earlier, didn't they?
Yeah. Have you seen the state of their Twitter account lately?
Oh yeah, let's get on to Twitter later, shall we?
I suspect there's at least 280 characters in the Borgia family.
Yeah. Well, quite. Oh my word! Shall we move on to March?
Yeah, and I reckon we're going to just about do March, and that's going to be the first part of our review done.
I think you're probably right. This is a bit longer than we thought it was going to be, isn't it?
It's good fun, though, isn't it?
Oh yeah, I don't mind it. Don't mind it at all. So in March, we were all starting to prepare for some kind of lockdown. I'm not sure we were quite prepared for what did result, but it looked fairly inevitable that life was going to change for a little while.
Yes. And in this case, we can call it lockdown 1, can't we? Because I think we are now on lockdown 3.
Yeah, quite right. Clearly the stock market was doing a bit of reacting and preparing as well, because it had a bit of a nosedive, did it not?
Yeah, do you know, I can't think of too many occasions where just this stock market crash has actually made a lot of difference. Often there are economic indicators that do, but the stock market on its own is quite hard to detect any real-time consequences.
Well, it's never really been a reliable indicator of the real economy, has it?
I don't think so, no. It's a reactor to, but not a predictor of, I don't think.
No. Well, one of the things that I've been reading this year, which is really fascinating, is a book called The 99% by a guy called Mark E. Thomas, which talks about this disconnect between, the macro economy and what capitalists consider as success. And what happens to the economic welfare of ordinary families, and the fact that the current flavour of capitalism includes as a cornerstone of its approach the calculated impoverishment of large sections of the population, inequality, kind of by design, in a way that's new in this, sort of new era of capitalist fundamentalism post Thatcher, post Reagan, when you compare it to the sort of post-war boom, the capitalism's golden age, as it were, where things were a lot more equitable, and all boats did rise.
Does that rather give the lie to the trickle-down effect in this post kind of capitalist world?
Yeah, well, I mean, trickle down only really works if there isn't a plug in the plug hole, keeping it all above the U bend, as it were. No, the whole thing that we now believe, well, how could it ever have been any different, is the sort of shareholder primacy, which is delivering value to the shareholders, is the sine qua non of the corporate form, and actually that's quite a new concept, although that's a bit counterintuitive. That was quite revolutionary in the sort of late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah. I suspect also offshore has a role here, because what we've also seen happen is lots of people enriching themselves through their companies, by shifting so much of their profit offshore. It doesn't pay tax. And not only, are people enriching themselves, but they're also moving that money out of their own economies into what are effectively passive receptacles of the money.
Absolutely. And while we're on the subject of impoverishment and and inequality as policy, we saw the Black Lives Matter protests begin at around this time, didn't we, of the year?
We did.
If they can ever be said to have begun, I mean, it's been rumbling away this for a long time, and whether you call those protests or riots, I suppose really depends on your political point of view, doesn't it?
Well, I guess. I mean, I'll be really clear where I stand here, which I just absolutely 100% supportive of the Black Lives Matter movement. Mm-hmm. One of the things that rather annoys me is this rejoinder of all lives matter, as if somehow it's singling out, which misses the point. So I come back with, but back in the days of the suffragette, you couldn't substitute votes for everyone for votes for women.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
That wasn't the point. They were protesting because women wanted the vote. Yeah. This is a protest because black lives are currently valued less than others. So it's not, of course, all lives matter, and of course everyone should have the vote. But that's not the point of what Black Lives Matter means. Yeah,
that's that response is a little bit tone deaf. And whilst in sort of earlier times you could be forgiven for kind of not understanding that side of things, it's not really much of an excuse anymore, is there?
No, and it is the everyday racism that really is troubling, and we're all prone to it. I mean, I grew up. I look back now to when in my former years when I was a young lad at school, and it was a racist environment. I mean, overtly racist, and I was just as racist as others because I wanted to fit in. But hopefully since then, at least I've educated myself to a degree that I am conscious of some innate levels of racism and do my very best to combat it.
Yeah, I mean, very much the first step and the most that many of us can hope for is to become conscious of our biases.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree with that. You can't undo a lifetime of conditioning, but you can learn ways of dealing with it. Yeah,
and I hope I'm getting there. So, I mean, back to the big story of the year. Really, it seems appropriate to end our first chunk there, which is obviously COVID and the change in our lives collectively that began for most of us in March. And I mean, there is a phrase here that's about to hove into view that I think we probably both despise, which is the new normal.
Yeah, what does that? I mean, is there anything normal now? I mean, I just hate it.
Yeah, I mean, it's widely and rightly despised, I think, as a phrase, as not really meaning anything.
No,
it doesn't mean anything. I mean, there's a new variant now, if you'll excuse the pun, called the next normal, which I suppose people using it choose to believe makes them look a bit more insightful. Shoot me if I ever say it, Graham.
I'm just trying to imagine somebody, at the start of the Second World War saying, well, I suppose we need to regard this as the new normal. I mean, I was having a conversation yesterday with my wife and saying, look, this is probably the nearest we've ever got to living through anything that remotely equates to what it was like in the Second World War, except that was 6 years and they were dropping bombs on people. Yeah. So, contextualising it, it's important to keep things in proportion, even though occasionally they feel pretty dismal.
I mean, we have collected some interesting and useful neologisms as well, haven't we, in our kind of wartime vocabulary?
Well, we've all become virologists for a start.
we have. I mean, social distancing is now a useful phrase with all sorts of meanings. R number is something that we might not have considered before.
No, absolutely. And there's a bit of me that suspects coming out of all of this, we will actually manage other viral infections better in future because we will accept things like face masks and distancing when, we're faced with like flu epidemics or whatever. I think, I wonder whether future years, once this is under control, we'll see a diminishing of some of those seasonally based viral outbreaks because we're just better at managing them.
No, absolutely. But I mean, on the vocabulary front, let's wave a fond goodbye, hopefully, to the new normal. The other one I don't want to see again, flatten the sombrero. Wouldn't object to never hearing that used again as a phrase?
I would dance around the embers of the burnt sombrero, but that's about it.
Yeah, well, wouldn't we all? In fact,
Yes.
I think that is the modern day equivalent of the hat dance, isn't it?
I think it probably is, Ray, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I think, on that bombshell, to coin a phrase, perhaps we ought to pause there before we move too far into the spring.
Well, I think so, and let's reassemble shortly, and we'll do April through to June.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.